Hello, everyone. Welcome to cooking. We'll get started in just a moment here. Just give people a minute to come into the meeting. All right. Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another workshop in our Spring Norwegian Music and Dance Weekend. Another episode in Stjerna Mix with another Stjerna, another star here, Jay Miller. He is a longtime Folklore Village friend, someone who grew up at Folklore Village, more or less. His father, Doug, was the executive director of Folklore Village for a long time. And as far as I understand, Jay kind of got started cooking at Folklore Village with his mom and became our caterer, longtime caterer for all of these festivals. I'm sure if you've been to Spring Norwegian Weekend before, you've eaten Jay's wonderful food. Since COVID happened, our festivals really wouldn't be the same without Jay's cooking. And so the way that we've found to involve him in the festivals has been to do these cooking classes. And he's got a really awesome setup for doing that and is going to lead you through making a Spinatsuppe today, which is a staple of his Norwegian menu. So welcome, Jay. And Jay's let me know that if you would like to ask any questions or make any comments during the session, you can type those in the chat and I'll be monitoring that. And I think Jay can see that as well on his screen. But he also invites you to just unmute yourself and ask too, ask and make comments. So feel free to also ask questions over audio. And we actually have our first question, Jay, in the chat. I have to use potato starch instead of flour. Is that 1-to-1 ratio?
It should be. If not, maybe just a little less potato starch. It is generally a finer grain. So as you're using a recipe that would ask for kosher salt, you wouldn't use table salt. It's the same just because of the different grain size. So I would use, maybe 1/3 to 1/4, something in there or less. You can, always add a little bit more later if need be. If you've got a little extra of that baked russet potato, you can always throw that in there too. We definitely don't want it to be too thick for you. You can always, water it down. It does get too thick, but that's not ideal. So it's best to just start on the lower side of it. So again, just use a little bit less and you should be fine.
All right, well, with that, and the question answer is doing a thumbs up. So sounds like we answered that. And with that, I will just turn it over to you, Jay, to introduce our meal today.
All right. Well, yes, we do have this soup, which if you've been to either spring or fall festival, you've had it because it is a fantastic soup. It is very traditional. I do make a few tweaks that I'll show you, but I have kept the essence of the soup intact. So little clarification, I can't see the chats. So Sally, Anna will take care of those, but
sure, yeah. Noted, no problem.
Yeah, if you want, you can just chime in too. It works just fine. Pardon my my other auxiliary camera here. This is just a point down at the cutting board, so you can see what's going on there. You'll see me looking back and forth like this. I've got different burners here, so I have stuff in front of me. I won't be using any of my stuff here today. I'm actually in my spring green kitchen, just because I've got things set up here, so I don't need to go to Folklore Village as much as I miss being in that kitchen. So we are going to be making this soup. Basically, in a nutshell, we're going to saute some onion. We're going to add some mushrooms, one of the non-traditional ingredients, but it does help give it a wonderful flavor. We'll add some garlic, Again, garlic is also not necessarily traditional, but you know, both of those, the mushrooms and the garlic, you don't taste it and say mushrooms and garlic, you taste it, but it's there adding more flavor to it. So it's not quite as, you know, simple of a soup. It is perfect as is, but you know, I'm making food for you guys, so I always want it to be as good as I can possibly make it. It's gonna get, you know, the spinach. I add a little bit of extra onion powder just for the oomph. Some white pepper as opposed to black pepper for this one. Flour to kind of bind everything together and give it some thickening. We'll add our stock. You can use either vegetable stock or a chicken stock. Both work just fine. Finish it with some allspice and some nutmeg. I like to add something fresh at the end. So we'll be adding some fresh parsley before we puree it. Garnished with hard-boiled eggs, and that's it. But we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff along the way, and I hope you learned something. Hopefully you've got your ingredients. If you're cooking along, you've got your ingredients out in front of you. I'm going to be chopping stuff up as we go, just because, you know, if you don't know how to perfectly cut an onion, I can show you. So first thing I do is I cut off just the very end. You can see it's only just that tiny little root bit, just because sometimes there's some dirt on there. And it's nice to keep your cutting board clean. And then we're going to cut it top to bottom through the root, right through the middle. Once you've got that cut, it's very easy at that point to peel off the paper on the outside. So easy. As you can see, it's not taking me I trimmed my fingernails this morning, as one should, making it just a little harder to get in there. All right. So it's 1 cup of onion. You know, I like onion. It's being sauteed. It's not like it's going to have an overwhelming onion flavor if you use a little too much. So, I mean, when I'm making a recipe like this, if it says 1 cup of onion, I say, okay, 1 onion. Unless they're small onions, then maybe 3. So if I wanted to dice these, I would actually hold it flat like this, put my hand, just the ball of my hand right there, and go across before I cut like this. But since this is going to be pureed anyway, we don't need to be crazy with our perfect cuts.
Jay, we have a comment and a question in the chat. Someone says, I forgot the mushrooms, darn. Is there anything that you would say if someone forgot an ingredient like that?
You know, the mushrooms are really just sort of an extra oomph. I mean, if you don't use it, well, then you're just making more of a traditional spinach soup. So it's fine if you don't have it. If you did maybe have some dried in the cupboard, it wouldn't be such a bad idea just to grab some hot water, and you can get those hydrating now. And then by the time those are ready to go, then you'd be able to just throw them into everything, and then it can get pureed with the rest of it if you had some dried mushrooms around. All right, we've got.
And then we have one other question. Someone says, if I have fresh spinach, how much do I use?
I mean, really, you're going to wind up needing that same weight. So that's one thing. I actually have used fresh spinach for this before, and I really didn't notice a difference in the taste. So by the time it was all cooked and stewed down, it really tasted the same as using fresh, except for, of course, fresh is much more expensive. So you're still going to need that same 12-ounce weight. And you will notice that that is a lot of bulk when you're working with fresh, since it does cook down so much, especially when it freezes. Well, at least I should say, when it does freeze and you buy it frozen, it's broken down a lot, so it doesn't take up as much volume. All right, so we've got our 4 tablespoons of butter. And with adding the flour in later, what we're basically going to be doing is, since we've already got the butter in here, is we're basically going to be making a roux. There's going to be a whole lot of other stuff in the pot, but we're basically going to be making a roux with the butter that's in here. We don't necessarily need that full 4 tablespoons, but it is going to make for a much richer soup. All right, I'm just going to keep an eye on these. We just want to soften these. We don't want to brown these at all. We just want to slowly soften them, so you don't need to burn up real high. Set that off the side. I've already washed these mushrooms. Yes, you can wash mushrooms. You know, the classic, you know, chefs would always say you have to, you know, brush them. You need your mushroom brush. Well, it turns out you actually don't. If they're going to be cooked, then you can just wash them. They really don't absorb water like everybody always said they would. But so I just wash them off, and then I just cut off the root ends. You can see it's a nice clean cut. There's no dirt or anything on there. And obviously I'm not trying to be real specific or anything with these, since they're just it's all going to get pureed. So we just want this to be in smaller pieces and get cooked down.
Someone is asking, the recipe says to add salt with the onion, question mark?
So I was just going to get to that. So I'm actually going to be making a garlic paste here. So yes, I've got the salt here, and I'm going to add about half of this right now. That was a very astute comment. Thank you for following along. The salt will help the onions break down a little bit as they go, and you can see they're already nice and soft. They're not that bright, fresh onion whites. So at this point, I'm fine with just adding in these mushrooms. And so what we want to do with these mushrooms, what's really going to help the flavor here, is I'm just going to switch views real quick so you're not talking, you're not looking at my hands. So when you cook down mushrooms, you notice that they just release a whole lot of moisture. And what I always make sure that I do is you want to, you know, get it so the mushrooms release that moisture, but then you want to reduce that. So you want that moisture to evaporate off. You're going to concentrate that mushroom flavor, so it's not going to be so watery in there. And you'll notice that, you know, it's gonna be dry at first when you start sauteing, then it's gonna get really wet in there, but you want to kind of reduce it down so that when you move a spoon across the bottom of the pan, it doesn't immediately just flood back in with that that mushroom moisture. It's great stuff. We love it, but we just want to get the water out of there so it evaporates out, and then we'll have a more concentrated flavor. Okay, for garlic, this part is not necessarily as important for this recipe, but some people do like to know how to process garlic in a very nice way. So I just cut off just the bottoms there. You can just give it a quick squeeze, and you'll get off the paper. If you're comfortable enough with doing it, you can just put your knife on it, give it a whack, and the paper will come off. Now, what I'm going to do here, which again, for this recipe is completely unnecessary, but I'm going to make a garlic paste where you just cut it up as fine as you can get it. And then we'll use the back of our knife to make it into a paste. And as I'm doing this, you can see me pause for a moment. It's only because I am stirring our soup. If you've seen me do any of these other classes, you'll notice I'm usually using a Japanese nakiri knife, but when I'm doing something like this, I really do like having the rocking motion of a classic chef's French knife. So for starters, we just go back and forth and just get it small pieces as we can. Stirring our pot with butter, mushrooms, and onions. I mean, that's just a great smell right there. All right, now I'm just gonna sprinkle the salt over this. Now what that is gonna do is not only give us some grit to kind of help mush it up, move this into the center a little bit, but it's also going to absorb some of that, the mushroom, sorry, the garlic juice that's going to come out of that. So we want the knife to be not at a very shallow angle. We want it pretty steep, so it's almost flat to the cutting board. And then we kind of do a rocking, mashing as we go. Hopefully, as my hand is moving, the autofocus will keep up with me. You can always just keep scooping it back into a pile and then just keep going at it. I mean, you could just, for this recipe, you could slice it, you could push it through a garlic press. I mean, you could just smash it with your knife and just toss it in. It's going to get pureed, so that would work. But I generally like it to be at least in smaller pieces. And again, this is just one of those techniques that's like, well, you want to have a garlic paste for something. A little technique you can have in your back pocket, because why not? Besides, I'm just waiting for these mushrooms to release their liquid and cook down, so.
That's a pretty cool knife technique there, Jay. It looks like you've got the knife kind of at an angle when you're doing that.
It's almost flat to the cutting board. So it's, as you're doing that, I mean, I wish you could, I wish I had a side angle here so you could really see, but I mean, it's steep enough that I couldn't fit a finger, you know, between the top of my knife. It's really, as it comes down, it's almost completely flat. I'm using almost the entire knife to do that. And another reason why I wouldn't be using one of my Japanese blades for this is it does have a much steeper angle on those, and I don't really like using like the salt to like grind in there. You know, I'm a little less careful. I'm a little meaner to my French blades than I am my Japanese blades. They can take it just a little bit better. All right, let's see, and I am good with that. And I'm gonna have the pot just sort of offset on the camera here, just so the steam doesn't go straight up into the lens. Now you can see as I push it to the side, there's a fair amount of water that is still kind of creeping into the pan. So that is cooking off very nicely. One thing that you can actually do, a couple of techniques you can do to make that part go faster. I'm going to add this in now. To make your mushrooms and onions, for that matter, break down faster if you wanted to, you can actually add just a little bit of water to the pan. Now, I know that is completely counterintuitive to everything that any chef has ever been taught, but adding just that little bit of water, what that does is actually, I'm just gonna leave it. I was gonna switch views, but we can leave it here. That steam is able to cover more area faster than just the heat at the bottom of the pan. So all of that heat will surround the cell membranes of both the onions and the mushrooms, and it will break down those cell walls faster, which is what's going to help it cook. Now, we definitely want just the oil heat. We don't want to boil them. We don't want to steam them to fully cook, but just that little bit, that little burst in the beginning will help them cook down faster, help us get us to that point where they release their liquids, and then we can cook them off faster. If you didn't want to do that, you can also just put a lid on it for just a minute or two, same sort of thing. It's counterintuitive to what a lot of classic chefs have been taught, but that's actually something that I learned from America's Test Kitchen, where they, they do all of these tests and like, no, we did this, and nobody could tell the difference when it was all done, and it just saved 5 minutes off of cooking. And I'm always good for shaving 5 minutes off of something.
And Jay, I'm sorry if you said this before, but how high do you have your burner up?
This is medium. Just medium. We don't want to go too high. We don't want to see any browning. I mean, if I was going to sit here and just like really babysit it and stir it constantly, we could go a little higher. But I'm fine with just keeping it low and slow. I mean, we're almost there. It helps to have a little more surface area. This is a 4-quart pot that I'm using here. So, if you were using something that was, if it just had a less surface area, it would take longer. I think for this amount of food, for this particular recipe, a 4-quart pot works really well. I have garlic on my fingers. I'm gonna wash my hands in just a moment. All right. We are almost there. We can see that a lot of that excess moisture is just not coming out like it was. So we're getting it, you can see it's starting to look a lot more syrupy as opposed to watery. And I like that. We are doing good here. Yep, that's looking good. All right, so when you see it looking like that, where it's not really watery, it's more syrupy, it's more looking like a thick melted butter, really. Then at that point, we can add our spinach. I used to take the frozen spinach and squeeze out as much of the excess liquid that I can. You can see in there, I'm leaving it because why take it out? That's spinach flavor in there. So let's just pour all of that in there. Spinach soup. Why squeeze out all that wonderful green liquid? We're just going to mix this up. This is also when we're going to add in, so we've got our 12 ounces of spinach in here. This is 2 teaspoons of onion powder. What I actually like to use is Penzeys granulated onion. I find that since it's granulated, not powdered, it's slightly bigger grain sizes, as it were. So it's I think it has more flavor because I think Penzeys is wonderful, but also since it has that larger grain size, it stays fresher longer. And this here is just a half teaspoon of white pepper.
Got a question from Ellen. She doesn't have onion powder and was wondering if she should have or add more onion. Oh, actually, update. She says, I have onion powder, but I figure maybe you can answer that question anyway if someone.
Yeah, again, this is one of those things where it's not traditional to add that onion powder. It's you could just easily leave it out. This is just one of those things that helps give a greater depth of flavor. I mean, just like using, I'm going to switch views so I'm not as, this is going to sit here for a minute. As using garlic powder is different than fresh garlic, in a lot of ways, and almost always fresh garlic is going to be better, but powdered garlic will give you just that different kind of flavor. In this case, for this, again, fresh onion is going to be much better, but just using that little bit of the granulated or onion powder, it's just going to help give a little bit more depth to the dish. For this particular one, I wouldn't want to use garlic powder. You know, it's just it's a different flavor, so it's all about what flavors are going to go into things. You know, I think garlic powder is, you know, great for a quick garlic bread, but if I'm going to be making a soup or a sauce or a stew or anything like that, I will not be using garlic powder for that. For that, I'm always going to go for the real stuff. Likewise, a lot of times I'll add in a little bit of onion powder to those same things, but you're never going to see me just leaving the onion out. You know, it's such a key part of it that's really something you want to have in there. At this point, really all we need to do once the spinach is in there is just get it hot, which it is. So in goes our flour. There's really no need to sift that unless your flour is crazy lumpy. If it is crazy lumpy, you might want to get new flour. All we're doing with the flour at this point, we're just mixing it around so we don't see any more dry flour. Once it's evenly distributed, then we are ready to add our stock. Now for stock, I had mentioned before, you've got, you know, kind of different options that you can go. You can use your own homemade vegetable stock, would be great in this. If you had your own chicken stock or something like that, I mean, that would be real good. If you had like a scratch chicken stock, would just make this absolutely perfect. Just to keep all of our vegetarian and vegan friends happy, for this soup, well, I guess there's butter, so it's not vegan. But for our vegetarian friends, what I actually usually end up using, I like the Better Than Bouillon, no chicken stock, no chicken base, or as I call it, you know, it's chicken-free chicken stock. It has a similar body and flavor of chicken stock, but it's vegetarian, and I like that one. I have prepared hot right over here.
Jay, someone's asking, does the flour have to be wheat flour?
No, I find I've used other flours, and I'm starting to stick here just a little bit. Nothing dangerous, but I'm just gonna get the liquid, get our stock in there. Now, if you're ever doing something like this and it's starting to stick just a tiny bit, nothing is browning or, you know, heaven forbid, burning. You can just put in, if you're putting in some sort of liquid, you can put that in and that will just release everything right off of it. And if you're not putting in a liquid, nothing is burned, just take it off the heat and just let it sit, and just the moisture from the dish will release that. Back to the flour question. So I have used other flours with different results. None of them for the soup were quite the same. So, you know, so many of the flours had such distinct flavors that I really found it changed the soup a lot. At this point, I mean, if you have a favorite, you know, flour substitute that you had used in gravies or something like that before, I think that would be fine. You know, maybe something that wasn't very distinct, like a rice flour or something, would work okay. Maybe not something with a stronger flavor, like a millet or a teff flour, have pretty distinct flavors that would, you know, change the dish quite a bit. If you happen to have an extra potato, then I would say just leave the flour out if you just wanted to go that route, and then just put in an extra potato to give you that extra body. It wouldn't be exactly the same as using the flour, but it would still be, I think it would be better than using an unknown flour flavor. So at this point, I mean, like I said, if you had something that you trusted that used in sauces before, go for it. If you just want to try it. Why not? It's still going to be different. It may not taste, for me, I have a specific taste that I'm going for this soup, and using other flours it didn't give me that authentic flavor that I was going for. So for that reason, I would say, you could use an extra potato if you had one on hand. Otherwise, go for it. Or just leave it out and it'll be a little thinner. It's soup. Make it. See what happens. I'm sure that was, mildly helpful. So, potato. I've got, this is the first time I've ever measured out the baked russet potato. I've always just thrown some in there, but for the sake of working with you guys, and you never know what size a medium potato is to somebody. A lot of times it's, what's medium? Well, we're going to say based on whatever else is in the store, but depending on what else came in the store, maybe they were all small, maybe they're all big. Medium is such a subjective. So something around a cup, something like that.
It looks like you had cooked those potatoes and kind of mashed them a little bit before putting them in.
Yeah, so that was a baked russet. In the ingredients does say that a russet potato, baked, peeled, and diced. I didn't necessarily dice this one. I just peeled it and shoved it into a measuring cup because it's a baked potato. So what that baked potato is going to do, since it is already baked and we've removed as much water as we can from it, a russet potato being what we'd call a starchy potato, as opposed to a waxy potato like a Yukon Gold or a red. Waxy potatoes are great for things like mashed potatoes, or au gratins, things where you really want to keep the shape. So those waxy potatoes they're going to hold their shape a lot better. The russet being a starchy potato, since it's even already cooked, when we put it in here, it's really just going to easily break down and sort of melt into everything else. And there's not going to be any potato chunks. It's just going to give us that body that we're going for the soup. So at this point, this is just going to simmer for about 10-15 minutes, something like that. What I am actually going to do, I'm actually going to cook the eggs now. In the instructions it said you should have them chopped and ready to go. That was just so this wasn't too much running around for you guys. And it's hard-boiled eggs. It's not that hard. But I'm just going to do them now because that soup is just hanging out. It's just doing its thing. So when I do eggs, I know there's a million different ways to hard-boil eggs, but I like to use a pan that is pretty much the size of the amount of eggs that I have. And I want it to really be just barely covering those. These are cold eggs going into just faucet cold water. And the way that I do it is I put them in here, I bring it up to a rapid simmer, and as soon as it gets there, I'm just going to turn it down so it maintains that rapid simmer. Give it, depending on the size of the egg, 10 to 11 minutes, and then run them under cold water to shock them cold. There's so many ways of doing it. This is my favorite way of doing it that I think works great for farm fresh eggs, which is what these are, which are notoriously difficult to peel, just because what makes an egg hard to peel is there's that membrane between the shell and the actual egg, and the fresher the egg, the stronger that membrane is, and that is actually going to make the shell bond to the egg white a lot better. The older an egg is, the more that membrane will break down and relax and make it much easier to peel. So that's why, with farm fresh hard-boiled eggs, you'll get that beautiful orange golden yolk, but you may have some trouble peeling them. I find this really works well, since these are farm fresh eggs that I got from Becky Rail out of Folklore Village. Gotta love Cold, this Cold Valley Farm. I turned up my soup just a tiny bit to get it to where we wanted. We don't want soup to boil. I never boil soup. There's some nice flavors in there, and we don't want to ruin any of those flavors by just boiling the bejesus out of it and just, killing those great light flavors. So I never boil a soup. A nice rapid simmer is fine. I want to see a few bubbles. I want to see it moving, but I don't want it to boil. So as far as timing goes, these eggs are slightly on the smaller side. I'm going to say 10.5 minutes, I think. We'll get these eggs there, and by that time, our soup should be good to go. So I'm just waiting for these. Actually, you know what? My flame should be all the way up, but it's not quite. Yeah, because this is toast. This time I've got a can ready. This happened before where I had to run back in the store and grab another can. And there we go. We are going again. So yeah, we're simmering soup. We are getting eggs up to temp. Once we got that rapid simmer, I'm gonna turn them down, time it for 10.5 minutes. As soon as that goes off, I'm gonna shock them cold. At this point, are there any random questions about what we're doing right now, or just whatever, because we've got a little time to kill right now?
Someone is asking, will you cover the eggs to have them boil faster?
I don't, because I really want to keep an eye on them and know that moment that they get to that rapid simmer. If there's a lid on it, I won't know until there's steam just gushing out of it. And also, I think that this particular technique, just it's all about timing. So it's the cold eggs, the cold tap water. They're starting at kind of this same level. The burner is going to bring the water up to a temperature, at a set sort of amount of time. If we speed that up too much, we might not get the exact same. So a lot of what I do when I'm cooking is just try to, for repeatable things, just get little things like that are easily repeatable. Like when I make poached eggs, I always start with room temperature eggs, not out of the fridge. I want those to be room temperature. I strain off just the real watery parts if they're not super fresh eggs, and the whites have broken down and they get really watery, and you get your crazy white fluff coming off of your poached eggs. But room temperature eggs, rapid simmer water, 3 minutes flat, perfect poached eggs. So for this cold eggs, it's all these little things like that.
And Laura is asking timing on the eggs, 10 minutes after the water starts to boil?
Yeah, so we just got to this point here with these eggs where we just reached our rapid simmer, and right now I just started my 10.5. So we're going to maintain this at a rapid simmer. So you see we're not boiling crazy, but we have a good amount of water movement, plenty of bubbles, but not so much that we have to worry about it, like boiling over or anything like that.
Someone is wondering if you've ever heard of an Indian spice called asafoetida or hing.
I have not, but I am intrigued. Make sure you send me a copy of the chat window when we're done here, because I'm going to need to look at the spelling on that, because
sure.
I got to say, every time somebody asks a question about a spice that I haven't heard of, it definitely piques my interest, because I know most of them. I would definitely not be so presumptuous as to claim to know all of them, but I definitely know there's some things out there that I don't know, and I get real interested when somebody asks a question. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Please tell me more.
It looks like it's it's an onion-free spice, but that gives a flavor like onion. so it's good for replacement for onion powder.
Well, that would be real great because yeah, I mean, a lot of people, for dietary reasons can't have onions, so that would be something really handy to look into. Thank you, appreciate that. Whoever that was out there in the ether.
Was Susan. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. What else you got?
I think Susan is trying to show you the spice. Looks like she's got some of it in a bag there.
Ooh, my computer is far away. I'm gonna get closer. There's my giant head. Ooh, that is a new one to me. Hello, giant head.
It's used in Indian cuisine for soups, lentils, and as an accent like garlic. But in Ayurveda cooking, you don't use onion or garlic.
Of course. Yeah, that I am aware of that. But yeah, Indian cuisine is definitely one of my favorite things. So when I got into that, it really opened up a whole new window into roasting spices and just like fresh blends like that. Like, I won't buy garam masala anymore because there's absolutely nothing like making your own garam masala, roasting everything, just, it doesn't even take long, but just making your own fresh and then just like finishing a dish with that is just, it's amazing. Nothing out of a jar, even Penzeys that I love so much, the garam masala, it's nothing compared to fresh.
Someone is saying they have a sensitivity to dehydrated onions. They're wondering if onion powder is dehydrated onions. I don't know if you know the answer to that, Jay.
Huh, I would assume, I'm going to say I don't know for sure, but it would make sense that the first step would be to dehydrate the onion and then pulverize it from there. But that's something else. Now I'm curious, how do they make these things? I can't imagine it would be freeze dried, just because that seems like something that would be a more expensive process. Freeze dried foods are always more expensive than dehydrated foods, and having powdered spices has been along, I believe, longer than the freeze drying technique.
Speaking of substitutes, we've just had a couple comments about the flour. Someone says, I'm using gluten-free flour that I usually bake with. And then someone else was saying, I'm considering buckwheat flour or barley. So yeah, just some comments.
Yeah, I think either one of those would be good. I'd say maybe the barley might be a little bit more familiar as far as a soup setting goes. Buckwheat, I do like buckwheat flour quite a bit, but it definitely has much more of a distinct flavor. So not that barley doesn't, but I think the flavor of barley in soup is so very familiar that I think that one might actually go better in the soup.
And then back on the onion or the garlic powder, onion powder conversation, someone has homemade garlic powder from a neighbor. The neighbor dehydrates it and then grinds it to a powder. So
sounds really good. Now, yeah, I would love to have some homemade garlic powder. That just sounds really fun. I mean, I wouldn't have considered making my own, but that would be good. All right, our soup. Let's see how much I can overlap pots here. Now you can see we're getting, there we go, not steaming out too much. So you can see we're getting a lot more body out of it. The flour is thickening it up. Potatoes are almost completely dissolved. It's going to be a real lovely soup. I like that a lot. And it just smells amazing. This is always a good time. I always say, as you're cooking, taste it as you go. It's really nice to know just like how the flavors change. So even if I was thinking about it, as soon as you add in the stock. You can taste it then and then taste it again after it's been going for a while. Whenever I am tasting a soup this early on, I try to avoid all the other bits and pieces that are in there and try to get just the stock, because I mean, that's, you know, what's going to be, there's a lot of other stuff in there, but the stock is going to be what's carrying everything through. So it's already just rich and full of flavor. I mean, it's got, you know, what comes out right now the most is, of course, that wonderful stock that we put in there, but it's got that butter comes through wonderfully, and the spinach and onions are just really shining right now. I mean, right there, it's just a great soup. I want to get another taster of it just so I can eat some more of it, which is a good sign, especially with something like this, where obviously I've made this soup so many times. You know, I don't even know how many times, but every time I make it, it makes me happy and it makes me smile. So, you know, anything that you can make that many times, and as you're making, it's just like, still good. It lets me know that it's definitely one that I am happy to keep making for you guys. Were there any more questions? Well, I got 2 minutes and 40 seconds left on the eggs before I shock these guys down. Just hanging out.
Not seeing any in the chat right now, although folks feel free to type in or speak up.
Sure. Well, while I'm just hanging out here, I'm just going to be picking some parsley leaves. When I do chop these eggs to put on our soup, of course, the chopped eggs being the traditional garnish for the soup, I always like to throw in some color just to make it look nice. So I always chop up some parsley, give it a little paprika. For this, I would use like just a normal, like a Hungarian sweet paprika, something like that, that has a real good flavor to it. But, you know, I absolutely love smoked paprika for so many things. But for this soup, it would be just a little off. Unless, of course, you accidentally burned the bottom of the soup. You didn't want to have to throw it away. In that case, smoked paprika might hide it a little bit. I don't recommend doing that. But at home, I am always very, very, very adverse to throwing away food. So if I was busy, you know, taking care of the kids, and I had to step away from the stove, and I accidentally let something get a little too dark because my priorities had temporarily changed, well, I'm not going to throw it away. Of course, I've never had to do that for you guys. We're always on point in the kitchen. Now, if you ever get a smoky Norwegian spinach soup, there's going to be a lot of whispering at the table. He burned it. And I like finishing the soup with parsley, because anytime I make a sauce or a soup or anything like that, it's going to be cooking for a while. I always want to finish it with something at the end, just to give it some brightness, give something back to it, because cooking things down for a long time really releases a lot of flavors. Timer just went off. But not only does it release a lot of flavor, but it also, you lose a lot of the freshness. All the fresh flavors are gone. So I always want to bring back some element of freshness to a sauce or a soup or anything like that, whether it's, you know, fresh herbs are always great. Citrus and citrus zest especially. I love using citrus zest for things like that, because it enables you to give that that brightness, that citrusy flavor to it without it adding acidity. Sometimes it's great for a sauce or soup. Other times it's just not a flavor that you want in that dish. Adding, a lot of you know, I'm a big fan of using alcohol in my cooking. When adding alcohol at the end of a sauce or something, I always make sure that it is very hot and that I cook it for another minute after I add it in. So any of the alcohol is cooked out of it thoroughly, but it still, maintains that brightness from it. You don't lose that. A lot of sauces have alcohol in it in the beginning, that you get that base flavor from it, but the flavor from it is gone by the end, which I like to add a little bit more back in at the end.
Is there a certain kind of alcohol that goes well with Scandinavian cooking?
Well, it really depends on what you're making. If I'm doing let's see, like a chicken dish, I really like using a dry unoaked Chardonnay. Is really good for that. The flavor just really goes well with the cuisine very nicely. This soup is one of the very few soups that I make that I actually doesn't have any alcohol in it, which I actually was just thinking earlier this week, like I finish it with some freshness, but there's no actual alcohol in this one. But you know what? It's so good that I don't want to do anything to it to change it. If you're doing anything that's like a pork dish, especially something that has like those Scandinavian like allspice flavors and stuff like that, I really like using a dry port for finishing sauces. That's not something I would add at the beginning of a sauce, but just a little bit at the end really gives some nice robust flavor, and I think it really goes well with a lot of those Scandinavian flavors. So as far as I'd say for a wine, a dry unoaked Chardonnay is really good, or a port is also very nice. You can go with a sweeter port if it was more of a dessert sauce or something like that. It would be really nice. But if you're just doing like a pork or something like that, then I think dry is the way to go. Our eggs are probably ready to peel. I'm just going to give them, just another minute. I've got, let's look down at the cutting board. I've got some parsley here. I think, that looks like a good amount for our eggs, just to give it some color. And just one more go over. A lot of times when people are slicing herbs, they really just cook it they cut it way more than I think is really needed. We don't need tiny bits. When you cut it into tiny little bits, you wind up with a wet cutting board, and all that moisture there, that's all the essential oils that came out of it. And we want to keep those. So, I think this looks like a good amount for finishing our soup when it comes to that point. I mean, we could call that a half cup, but there's a little bit more. Let's cram it in there. There we go. That'll give us a nice fresh finish once everything is cooked. All right, I am just going to grab our eggs. Just gonna brush this into the compost. All right, grab those eggs. Now, usually I do this, I peel them with under running water in the sink. I'm just going to use this water here because I don't have a camera over by the sink. So I just roll it all over the place. Compost here. Let's see it. You know what I'm going to do? Here we go. Hey, here's where the mushrooms were. Mushroom bowl is now scrap bowl. Oh, nice and even. These farm fresh eggs are just peeling beautifully.
Did you cool them before you peeled them?
Yeah, so as soon as they were done, from the time that I took them off of the heat until just now, I just had cold water running over them. I didn't have any ice in the kitchen. You can also just like take the eggs out of the water and put them into an ice bath.
I
But
always have trouble with eggs, hard-boiled eggs, with getting them to cool off enough to peel.
yeah, and it's funny because I've done it before where I'm, doing, 12 dozen eggs for an event, and, to cool them down, we run cold water over them for 5 minutes, and it's that cold well water. So it's real cold. Run it for 5 minutes, then we shut it off, and then you turn around and 5 minutes later, the water is steaming because the eggs just hold so much heat that when you've got, even in a really big pot, like a 35 quart pot, you got 144 eggs in there. Even 5 minutes of cold running water isn't enough to bring down the temperature that much. But like I said, there's more than one way to hard boil an egg, but you can see why I like that way. Even those farm fresh eggs, with that intact membrane, just stayed, it just came right off. And that makes me real happy. So again, usually I do this under cold running water, but this water here is just to get off any residual shell bits. For chopping them, I'm just gonna use an egg slicer. Works real well. I just put it in, turn it sideways, and done. And shake them off real good because obviously we don't want to get any water in here. Whoop, man down. And let's see, you can always tell an overcooked hard-boiled egg because it's got that like green ring around it. You can see we've got no green ring, perfectly set yolk. If I wanted soft-boiled eggs, I would do cold eggs from the fridge and do that same thing that I just did, except 6 minutes. If I wanted just a little bit of a jammy center, not fully runny, not runny at all, set, but it's kind of nice and jammy, I do like 9 minutes. My wife's a vegetarian, so I cook a lot of eggs. So I got a lot of ways of doing it. All right, let's get this out of the way. And I got that parsley right there. A little bit of Penzeys Hungarian smoked paprika. That'll do it. You know what? Just want a little more flavor. My mom always told me growing up at Folklore Village, it says season every layer. Just because one part of it is good doesn't mean you don't need to season the next layer. So you know what? Salt and pepper too. Fresh cracked. And I should have, a fork would be the right thing to help separate it a little bit, but that is like 8 paces away, which in a kitchen is just way too far. And there we go. Isn't that nice? Just, the salt and pepper alone would give it some nice, some great flavor. But just adding that smoked paprika, that fresh chopped parsley, that's really going to make, God, it just smells better. It's really going to make our garnish for our soup that much better. And just because everything's got to be lovely, put it in our nice serving bowl here with our very fancy compostable cornstarch spoon. I'm just going to set this off to the side. Okay. Now back to Soup Town. And make sure I don't steam up that. All right. Well, that is looking real nice. I did just turn it down. We had a nice low simmer going. Turned it down just a minute ago. And at this point, I'm actually going to shut it off. So now, oh yes?
Someone's asking if they're planning to eat the soup later, should they peel and cut up the eggs later too?
You know what? I mean, they will hold okay. I would say you can, I'd cook them now and peel them now. That would be just fine. But just so they are the absolute prettiest that they can be, I would wait until the last minute to chop and decorate them. I mean, you saw how long that took me to chop those and just toss them like that. You know, it was just a matter of a minute and a half, 2 minutes to get that done real quick. So I would say to get as far as cooking and peeling the eggs, but then just, you know, if you've got an egg slicer that makes it go so quick, I would do that part at the end. And this, again, this is a soup, so it reheats real well. So, you know, it'll hold fine. This can definitely go. Okay, so we are going to, for our finishers now, we're going to put in a 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. And also a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Quick note on, wrong button. Quick note on nutmeg. I almost always use fresh nutmeg. If you've ever seen it, this is a tiny piece of one. They are, you know, it's a nut about that size. You can see this one has been thoroughly worked down. I use a microplane for just to grate it. I always have 2 microplanes. The way that I color code it is the orange one is for citrus, the orange handle. So this is for softer things or cheeses for that matter. But you know, I do like fresh grated seeds and things, and obviously it's a lot harder. It's going to be a little more rough on your microplane teeth. So these will get replaced more than my citrus and cheese zesters, just because, you know, these get a little more abuse. So I like to have 2 different ones. That way it'll make the other one last much longer. And they're like, what, $12? So, all right. That's my spiel on fresh nutmeg. And it really is just a wonderful flavor. And, you know, it's going to eyeball a 1/4 teaspoon. And that just smells amazing. As soon as that hits that hot soup, the flavor just boom. All right, at this point, it is fine to throw in our heaping 1/2 cup of fresh parsley. I'm just going to push that down in. At this point, we are done cooking the soup. You could use, this is my immersion blender. This is going to make real short work of it. And that right there looks perfect.
What should people do if they don't have an immersion blender?
For that, you can use a, you know, anything really, a blender, Ninja, you know, a food processor, as long as you don't exceed the liquid, the liquid max level amount. But If you, one note, if you do use anything that has a sealed top on it, and a lot of blenders will have a sealed ring around it, I would let the soup cool a little bit first, because when you mix something, it really releases a crazy amount of steam, and that will build pressure in there. So if it's sealed and you're holding it, that is explosive pressure that will explode at you. So if it's not sealed, I mean, be careful for sure. It's not a bad idea to let it cool a little bit, but definitely be wary of blending when it's really hot. All right, and this, my damn towel to keep my cutting board from moving, is now going to serve as our little, there we go, our little tablecloth here. I guess, of course, now that we've got this far, let's see where we are for seasoning. No, that is there. I love that. You know, when I get to that point, the only thing that I'm going to add to it is either salt or pepper. It's got everything else that it needs. You just want to adjust those final two, and you're good. Take some of our eggs. Just put that right there. Perfect. And again, not very traditional, but if you have a good quality olive oil, it's very nice to finish that with it. I mean, maybe not whatever oil you've got laying around, but if you know it's a good quality oil, it's one that you love, and you really like the flavor of it, just drinking as is, whatever, then definitely just give it a little finish, and you're really going to enjoy that.
That's beautiful, Jay. It looks like some folks are finishing up. I'm still working here, but Ellen says, mine tastes great, thank you. And Susan says, love that nutmeg flavor with the spinach. And Sal, oh, sorry, yeah. And
continue.
And oh, sorry, I keep talking over you.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and then just comment, someone looks real good, didn't make it today, but I'll do that soon. So yeah, and that nutmeg flavor, I wouldn't expect to use nutmeg in a soup like that. I associate nutmeg as a dessert spice. So
yeah, a lot of people do. And allspice and nutmeg are very common Scandinavian spices that, you know, find their way into a lot of very unexpected things, but they're really good, and especially using that fresh grated, it's really going to give you a brightness from the nutmeg that a lot of people just don't associate with the nutmeg, which is again why those two flavors, I only add them at the very end. I don't want to cook it into anything. I want them to stay as preserve their bright and fresh flavor as much as possible. Sorry, I'm going in for another. This is good.
someone says, this is my favorite soup. Mine tastes a bit too salty though. What do you have solutions for that?
Really the only thing you can do when there's too much salt is kind of make the soup grow. At this point, I would say add some more stock. Hopefully the extra salt flavor didn't come from the stock. If it's a saltier stock, then that'll definitely do that. But if it's not a problem with the stock, if the stock is too salty, then you just want to water that down. That I would say you just want to bulk it up, make it grow. So add some more stock or some watered down stock. You can add some more spinach to it. It's no problem at this point to add more spinach and blend everything up. You're going to want to just readjust the flavors again, since you've made it grow. Maybe add a little bit more onion powder. You'll want to readjust the flavors after that. But people always say like, well, how do I get the salt out? It's like, well, you can't really get the salt out. it's in there. So you want to make it grow. If you had something, I don't know, so maybe some bitter greens like arugula or something like that, bitter counteracts salt flavor. So if you had some bitter greens, you could definitely chop up some arugula and throw that in there. Maybe some, if we had dandelions outside right now, I'd say just grab some dandelion greens and throw those into your soup. Let it sit in the heat for a couple of minutes. But that would be my answer to that.
Awesome. Arna says, if you put potato in the soup, it absorbs some of the salt.
Yeah, I have done that before. I guess it's probably one of those that when I did it, it was for something similar. It was, like 3 gallons of soup. And I didn't find that it worked, but maybe that's because I added 1 potato or maybe 2 to like 3 gallons of soup. So maybe 1 potato to a smaller volume like this, I actually could see how that would work. I've never tried it with a smaller volume, but for that to work, you want to peel the potato first. And again, I think having a starchy potato, like a russet potato, would more readily absorb things more than a waxy potato. Not that it wouldn't work. I think that if you were going to do it, a russet would work better. But yeah, thanks, Arna. I haven't come back to that one in a while, just because 1 potato didn't work for 3 gallons. So
Someone asks, what kind of bread would you serve with this soup?
what I really love using is a great Swedish rye bread. Schubert's Bakery in Mount Horeb has always been my go-to for that. Unfortunately, it looks like they're no longer open and looking for somebody else to come in and take things over. So I really hope that recipe isn't lost. Short of that, I like using like a sourdough rye is actually a flavor that I really love with this soup. Clausen's European Bakery in Middleton here, not here, half hour that way for me. They make a really nice sourdough rye that I think goes really well with this soup. Otherwise, something that is just a good, even a hearty seedy bread, I think goes really well with this. So those would be my 3 recommendations there.
All right. Well, we're getting lots of comments. So thank you, Jay. This was delicious. Someone's saying this was my first ever cook along Zoom cooking class, and it was so much fun, so clear. So lots of thanks, and people are going to enjoy their soups. Yeah, well, we went a little bit over time here. So thank you, Jay, for staying with us for a few extra minutes. And we're going to have an hour break now, or I guess a little bit less than an hour, because we went a little over time. And then we'll be back with another fiddle class with Loretta Kelly and the discussion Pulse through the years with the Sudal family. So do join us for that. And the Sudals were, just like Jay, longtime Folklore Village people. And actually I hear that Julfrid designed Farwell Hall. So tune in to hear more about their life and times teaching Norwegian dance at Folklore Village and around the country. And yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jay. Round of applause. And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye. Bye, everyone. And bon appetit. Hope det smakar, and see you soon.